This really is the starting point for SEO. You need to get really familiar with the contents of the Google Webmaster Guidelines. It's advice direct from Google, not from me or anybody else, but direct from Google. Anything that Google suggests that you do in the guidelines, you do. Anything that Google tells you not to do, you don't do. And the other thing is, unfortunately, the Google Webmaster Guidelines are written in Google, not English, which is almost the same, but sometimes can be a little bit opaque. The Google Webmaster Guidelines don't tell you exactly what to do for SEO. They really just sketch out things that Google likes, things that Google doesn't like, things that Google recommends you do, and also things Google recommends you definitely do not do. So if you want to view the guidelines, the easiest thing is just simply go to Google and do a search using the phrase Google Webmaster Guidelines. So here you are. I've done a search for Google Webmaster Guidelines, and it's the first one up here. Actually, I just noticed out of interest, I did a video some time ago on the Google Webmaster Guidelines, and look, there it is, it's showing up. So when I searched for Google Webmaster Guidelines, up came my video, which is about 26 minutes long. So you could actually go watch that just out of interest to see how it matches up with this video. Anyway, I'm going to click on this first link up here, and here we are. This is the Google Webmaster Guidelines. There is a little video which is not particularly useful, but you can have a look if you want to. And if we go through here, it says, following the general guidelines below will help Google find, index, and rank your site. We strongly encourage you to pay very close attention to the quality guidelines below, being this bit here, which outlines some of the illicit practices that will basically provoke Google into banning you. So it is very clear now that Google are not the friendly sort of creature of old when they first started, when it was all carrot and no stick. They now have a very small carrot and a very large stick. And if you break their rules, you know, at best they might demote you. More likely these days, they'll probably just throw you out the index altogether. So it's vitally important that you don't provoke Google. We'll look at these bits and pieces in a minute. There's 3 sections that are very important. We'll look at those in a minute, the general guidelines. If we come down here and look at the quality guidelines, it's basically telling you, well, look, these are a list of things that Google doesn't like. It does tell you that if you find another website that's abusing the quality guidelines, you can report them. So as I have mentioned elsewhere in this course, if you do have a website that's listed above you in the search results, and if you're pretty sure they're there because of deceptive SEO tactics, you can go here, fill in a spam report, and according to a report I read a while back, in the majority of the cases Google takes action. So, you know, if someone's above you in the search engines by legitimate results, fair enough. If they're there by cheating, report them, you know, get rid of them. Now there's a couple of basic principles here which are very important, and as I say, this whole page here is written in Google, and you have to kind of read between the lines. So the first basic principle there, it says, make pages primarily for users, not for search engines. Now in English, what that means is don't over-optimize. If you do over-optimize, you can now get penalized for over-optimizing your website. So as it says, make pages primarily for users, not for search engines, or in English, don't over-optimize. Don't deceive your users by using sort of sneaky tricks. Then the next one, it says actually avoid tricks intended to improve search engine rankings. A good rule of thumb is whether you'd feel comfortable explaining what you've done to a website that competes with you or to a Google employee. That's a pretty good test as any. I mean, if you're writing a website and you've been fairly aggressive for your SEO, imagine someone from Google sitting next to you and you're explaining why you've done everything. And if you can explain it with a straight face, you're probably okay. If, on the other hand, what you've done is blatantly to promote your website and there's no other reason for doing it, then that will annoy Google, and that's the sort of thing that can get you demoted. As it says, another useful test is, does this help my users? Would I do this if search engines didn't exist? You know, those are the sort of questions you've got to think about. You don't want to over-optimize. Other basic principles, as it says, the last bit there, it says, think about what makes your website unique, valuable, or engaging. Make your website stand out from the others in your field. So what it's really talking about there is quality, unique content. You know, content is king. If we go down here, there's some more specific guidelines. Avoid sort of automatically generated content. Believe it or not, you can actually buy software where you just sort of shovel a whole load of keywords in one end and out come lots and lots of formatted paragraphs out the other end. The formatting of these paragraphs is generally pretty awful, and it just doesn't sound well when you read it. It doesn't look good, it won't impress your customers, and it certainly won't impress Google. So don't use those kind of things. Incidentally, I could click here and get more information off, so obviously the blue links here means I can click and get more information. This bit here, it clearly says do not, avoid participating in link schemes. Link schemes are things like you swap with sort of 20 other similar websites. You give them a link, they give you a link, or just simply buying in links from link farm providers, all that kind of stuff. It's specifically stated in here that you shouldn't do this. So if you do buy in links, chances are you could be thrown out. It's happened to many, many different companies. Avoid creating pages with little or no original content, so what's called thin content. Sometimes less is more from Google's point of view. Rather than have lots and lots of pages with very few words on them and not very interesting words, if you're given the choice between one or the other, go for fewer pages that have more words on them, but has interesting words that are kind of all on message, all about one particular topic ideally. There's other more technical things here, things like cloaking, sneaky redirects and what have you. Those are techniques that bad SEO people can use to promote websites. They might work in the short term, but they will get you banned as sure as anything in the long term. Things like hidden text, the old trick of white text on a white background at the bottom of the page, stuff like that. Google is wise to that now, it doesn't work. Avoid excessive doorway pages. A lot of SEO people will tell you that doorway pages are absolutely fantastic, but it's actually in the list of things to avoid, as you can see. Use them with caution. I do have a chapter specifically on doorway pages. Really the secret to doorway pages, if you must create them, is to mark them as no index and no follow, which again is covered in a different chapter somewhere. Scraped content just means content that you've stolen from elsewhere, really. Using affiliate linking schemes that don't particularly add any value to your pages, that can also damage your website. Packing your pages with relevant keywords, again, not recommended. Having malicious software on your website, that can really harm your website. Abusing what's called rich snippets. And finally, sending automated queries to Google. So for instance, if you want to see how well your particular website is showing up in response to a particular SEO phrase, then you can buy software where you can just type your name of your website in, supply it with a list of keyword phrases, click on a button and it goes and checks all of the different phrases against a particular version of Google. And Google specifically warns you not to do this, so don't basically. Then it goes on to be a little bit more positive. It says, follow good practices like these, like monitor your website for hacking and make sure you remove any hacking as soon as it appears. You won't get thrown out if your site does get hacked, providing you do something about it on a timely basis. I mean, I've been hacked a couple of times over the years. I mean, going for over 20 years now, and I've probably been hacked about, 3 or 4 times. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, but I still get hacked. So, it's just a fact of life, unfortunately. If you're on the internet, there is a possibility of being hacked. The other thing that is specifically mentioned is preventing and removing user-generated spam, or in English, comments. You may have noticed if you check out any of my websites, I completely disable comments. They're just a complete pain. Then it goes on to the kicker at the bottom here. If your site violates one or more of these guidelines, then Google may take manual action against it. So that couldn't really be clearer. If you violate one or more of these guidelines, Google may take a manual action against it. It then goes on to say once you have remedied the problem, you can submit your site for reconsideration. Google has got meaner over the years. It's got a long memory, doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. So even though technically you can fix your problems with your website if you do get thrown out, it could take a long time. You might be better off just sort of creating a new website. Or even better, don't annoy Google in the first place. So those are the basic principles and specific guidelines and the quality guidelines. You've also got this general guidelines section. So let's go and look at these. So if you click here to open this up. So this is about helping Google to find your pages. It says, ensure that all pages on the site can be reached by a link from another findable page. The referring link should include either text or for images an alt attribute that is relevant to the target page. You might think, what on earth is that about? Well, all it's saying is that you want every page on your website to be linked to other pages, so that you don't have any page that's not actually linked to initially from the home page, then possibly via other intermediate pages. It's also mentioned the fact that it likes text, or for images it says use an alt attribute, which is text. What this is really telling you, if you read between the lines, is that Google really likes text above all else, because Google can understand text. The algorithm can interrogate the text and figure out what your website's about. All the way through this course, you need to bear that in mind, that Google loves text above all else. And the more text you put in a website, the better Google will like it. The next bullet point there says provide a sitemap file with links that point to the important pages on your site. It then goes on to say also provide a page with a human readable list of links to these pages, sometimes called a site index or a sitemap page. You think, what on earth are they on about now? Well, again, more Google speak. The first part of that sentence, where it says provide a sitemap file with links that point to your important pages on your site, that is what everyone else in the world calls an XML sitemap. The second bit of this paragraph, I'm just going to highlight it, that bit, the rest of the world would call that an HTML sitemap. So there's two types of sitemaps that Google likes. The first bit there is XML sitemap. Second bit is an HTML sitemap. Don't worry what those are, they're covered in separate chapters, but it's there in black and white. Google is telling you to create them. It then goes on to say limit the number of links on the page to a reasonable number. It never used to say what that reasonable number was, and about a year or so ago they added the bit in brackets, a few thousand at most. It would never occur to me to have a few thousand links on a page. Personally, I would never go above 30 or 40, something like that. So this idea of a few thousand links on a page seems insane to me, but there you are, that's Google's advice. Some of these other bits here we don't have to worry about, things like robots text files, we do cover those elsewhere. So let's go and look at this second bit, help Google understand your pages. It says create a useful, information-rich site and write pages that clearly and accurately describe your content. So what that's really saying, again, is put lots of text on the page and make sure the text is all on message. So, you know, in my case, let's say I want to create pages of information about, say, SEO seminars, WordPress seminars, and YouTube seminars. What that's really saying is that I'd be better off creating 3 different pages rather than cramming all that information onto one page. So that way the text can accurately describe the content. You know, it can accurately focus on one particular item, be it SEO training, WordPress training, or YouTube training. It then goes on to say, think about the words users would actually type in to find your pages, you know, when they're doing a search within Google. And then it says, and make sure these words actually appear within your site. It sounds kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised how often people don't do that. Next it says, ensure your title elements and alt attributes are descriptive, specific, and accurate. So again, what that's saying is, make sure you put what's called an HTML title on each page, and make sure that title specifically relates to the content of that page so that it's descriptive, specific, and accurate. What you don't want, for instance, is the same title on every page, in which case it wouldn't accurately describe the contents of the page. And it's also doing the same with alt attributes, which you use with images. Again, more on that later. Design your site to have a clear conceptual page hierarchy. Again, most people don't bother with this. For instance, if we're looking at the page, what that is saying really, or suggesting, is that maybe you should have one header 1, a couple of header 2s, and a couple of heading 3s. So you have the hierarchy, you know, 1, 2, 3. You can also take the concept a stage further. So for instance, you could create sub-directories containing particular grouped pages. So an example I like to use is a pet shop. If you have a pet shop, you could have one subdirectory called cats, another one called dogs. So you could put all the pages that you create relating to cats in one subdirectory, all the pages relating to dogs in a separate subdirectory. So again, it's just using this hierarchical idea. Again, another way you could interpret this is to use what are called hierarchical breadcrumbs, which again I cover elsewhere. It then goes on to say, follow our recommended best practices for images, videos, and structured data. And you can go and sort of look at these, but really what it's saying is that, if you look at images, for instance, it's really saying, give your image files a useful SEO file name, put alt tags behind them, that kind of thing. Same goes for video. As you can see, if I click here, I can click on where it says help visitors use your pages. And as it says, try and use text. So again, it's talking about text, notice. Try and use text instead of images to display important names, contents, or links. So again, a very broad hint there that Google likes text links. I mean, you can have images which link to other pages or other websites, but it's basically saying there, black and white, try and use text, not images, to display important information. It then goes on to say, if you must use images, then use an alt attribute, which is text behind the image. So again, we're back to text. Ensure that all links go to live pages. In English, no broken links. You can also validate your HTML. This bit here, increasingly important. Optimize your page loading times. So really you want a nice fast loading speed, especially on mobiles. And you can use things like Page Speed Insights. You can go and click on that, type in your URL, and that will give you a loading speed for both the mobile and also the desktop version of your website. So they need to be as fast as possible within reason. It then goes on to say, design your website for different types of devices. So desktops, tablets, smartphones, the whole range. And it does suggest you use the mobile-friendly testing tool to make sure that from Google's point of view, it's all working okay. Then you've got other things to worry about. It says ensure that your site appears correctly in all the different browsers. So, you've got lots of different browsers these days. You've got Microsoft Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Opera, Firefox, and more if you want to. But just make sure that your website, looks okay in the majority of the, the well-known browsers. Then finally, we're getting towards the end now. Finally, if possible, secure your site's connection. What that means is that your website should these days start with HTTPS rather than HTTP. The S just means secure, so it's using encryption technology on your entire site. Finally, when it comes down to the last thing here, we're talking about help visitors use your pages. It's suggesting that your pages are useful for readers with visual impairment. So for instance, you can use testing tools to see how a screen reader will interpret your alt tags and things like that. So that's a quick run through. As I say, you need to read through this. I'd say print this out, read through it, and keep reading through it. Click on all these little links here so you know exactly what Google is talking about, and go and check things. It's like the Page Speed Insight. If you go and click on that, that will take you to the relevant tool. You type in your URL there, and then it will give you a speed check. So you need to do all of this, and as I say, really pay attention to what Google is saying. Now, I've spent a fair amount of time on this, and the reason is, this is the starting point. I've actually taught SEO to web designers, many of which have never even heard of the Webmaster guidelines. And as I say, this is the site that Google itself recommends that you start with when you're looking at anything to do with SEO.